brightness misconceptions briefly, and then we'll go into myths about batteries. Okay? So that's it. That's basic outline of the 3 basic myths and the myths of FL1 standards. All right, so just remember, lumens are measured at 30 seconds. You got to remember, all these things are measured because incandescent, here to wrap up this video, I think I'll put this video all in one, so whatever, it'll just be long. But the ANSI standards are based on flashlights from a long time ago, and you'll see that with all these standards. Okay, all 3 or 4 of these standards, whether or not you want to divide candela from throw, because that's pretty much the same thing. Okay, these two, these candela and then the throw, or excuse me, this throw right here and then this candela is about the same thing. Okay, those are interchangeable. It's all based on incandescent flashlights that are old. So what used to happen is incandescent flashlights, first they warm up and then they get to their brightness, and that usually took 5 to 10 seconds. So then you take the lumen measurement at 30 seconds, and that gives you an accurate idea of a light that isn't shooting down super fast, but it's also, it has had time to warm up. So this still applies to HID flashlights today. Then the runtime has to do with old batteries. Old batteries always went out on output, and we didn't used to drive LEDs. We used to just power the bulb, and powering the bulb was always direct. Okay, because the bulb is its own resistor. A light bulb is a resistor. Okay, an incandescent light bulb is a resistor. LEDs are not resistors. They are what's called semiconductors. They have nothing to do with resistors, okay? But a normal light bulb is what's called a resistor. So they're always direct drive, and basically it's shorting out the battery, but there's enough resistance in the light that it doesn't really short the batteries out. And so the runtime always curved. You always went from 100%, and you would always have this kind of this smooth exponential down curve that then flattened out. Okay, and runtime was based on that. Okay, that's why obviously today we can manipulate runtimes, or like I said, this thing has a very flat runtime. So this 5 hours underestimates how efficient this thing is, because it's pushing through a luminous SPT90 Gen 2 LED. It's pushing 1250 lumens through that, which is a relatively inefficient 100 lumen per watt LED, 90 lumen per watt LED. Okay, it's doing that for 5 hours and 15 minutes at 1200 lumens, which is deceivingly more efficient than it sounds. Other lights push around 6-7 hours at 1200 lumens with 418650. So this is it's a little bit inefficient, but it's because of the LED. This is actually a pretty efficient light. That being said, I'm not sure how flat this is, and we'll come back to that some other day. That's what it's based on. So going on to throw, flashlights didn't throw 800 meters. Okay, now listen to me very carefully. When ANSI standards came out for throw, they were based on throwing light across a room or across a football field. That was it. You either had at 10,000 candela and you could throw 100 meters or so, a single football field, all right, or you had 1,000 candela or way less than that, and you could throw light across a room. And in both those cases, 1/4 of a lux is just fine. All the way up to like 100 meters, 1/4 of 1 lux can easily make it back to you, folks. So we'll get to miss and throw about the next video, but that's coming from lights that weren't ridiculous, so powerful. In the 1970s and 80s, especially the 1980s, they started coming out with HID lights, which were hundreds of times more powerful than the previous incandescent lights. And they also had halogen bulbs. In the very late 60s they came out, but like it was the 1970s, to my understanding, that halogen started to be used in these large 6-volt lanterns and whatnot else. And halogen's slightly more efficient, gives you more runtime, and also gives you a little bit more brightness. Okay, it can be pushed a little bit harder than a normal filament, so you can stack like 6Ds or even 8D cells, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, into a light, and you can get a little bit more voltage in there, and you can put out more power. You can put out 100 watts or so into a halogen bulb, and you would get more power, you get more brightness. Okay, and that was here in the 80s. We don't hear about those anymore for a number of reasons, including its cost of production, its production cost versus its value to customers, because you have to keep replacing the bulb and everything. We don't really have those anymore. In any case, but this was invented even before that. So even those things don't fall under these 400 meters or ridiculous 2,000 meter outputs. Okay, or even HIDs, which throw much farther than LEDs, and we'll talk about that later as well. But I'll do a separate video comparing HIDs to LEDs. Talk about whether or not I'm going to buy a Maxabeam, which I really want to buy. In any case, so all these things, I'm not going to talk about Candela because that's the same as throw. So throw, runtime, and So throw, runtime, and lumens. Okay, all these things are all created for old incandescent lights running off of zinc carbon batteries, which we don't even use. We have them today, but we don't really use those too much anymore. Okay, and they runtime curves down. The brightness actually warms up and then it goes down, and then you have, so that's measured at 30 seconds, and then you have the distance, which is based on between 10 meters and 100 meters. It's never supposed to be 1,000 meters. Okay, in any case, water resistance is a much newer thing that has been actually redefined since 2000. Okay, so that's different. Drop testing is always based on concrete, and like I said, with most lights, they'll say like 1 or 1.5 meters. Most lights can do 5 or 6 meters. They don't want to tell you that because they don't want you to take it up on top of a ladder, drop it flat on the concrete onto its face, and break the lens, or onto the tail cap and the battery breaks. Okay, because the battery gets slammed into the ground. All right, they don't want you to do that because technically speaking, all right, the light might break. All right, so, but that wraps it up for ANSI myths. Just understand that there's a lot of misconceptions with how ANSI standards work in today's flashlights. And at this length of video, I think we'll go ahead and cut it off. We'll talk about misconceptions about brightness and what brightness really is. And then we'll talk about, and then I'll have another, maybe the same video. We'll talk about batteries and how batteries really work. And the misconception of voltage having anything to do with, voltage has nothing to do with the watt output of a battery. Okay. And it has nothing to do with the brightness. Okay. Just because something has higher volts doesn't mean, like, a good example is a 9-volt battery. If you run a 9-volt battery with a flashlight, it will not close compete with these 3.7 volt battery flashlights. Okay, even 4.2 volt battery flashlights, the voltage has nothing to do with the wattage of a flashlight. Okay, it has nothing to do with its ability to run long for a really long time or to be really bright. That wattage has nothing to do with voltage. I mean, it does have to do something with voltage and amperage, but it has nothing to do with voltage alone. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a third installment. All right.